Welcome to another Whiteboard Friday Revisited, where we look back at past Whiteboard Friday episodes so we can better understand what's changed, make better sense of the present, and then speculate on the future as we love to do. I'm your host, Jo Cameron, and this week I had the absolute pleasure of chatting with Garrett Sussman, Marketing Director at Ipullrank, and host of this fantastic episode from merely 12 months ago, Optimizing for AI Overviews. And it was published, I think it was only a couple of weeks after they changed from search generative experience to AI overviews. So it was super timely at that time. And Garrett is someone who knows a lot about this space. And he's someone, I was thinking about this, he's someone who I consider to be an incredibly thoughtful thought leader and someone who has so much information and is so willing to share it. So incredibly generous human to give up his time, not only to film this, but to revisit it with me so we could see what has changed. And one of the things that stood out to me, and I'm sure it does to a lot of you as well, who are feeling the impact of AI overviews incredibly keenly on the search landscape, is the prevalence of AI overviews in search. It's ballooned from about 1% in 2004 to over 50%, depending on what you're searching for. And it's really not that easy to switch it off, even if you really, really want to. It's not that simple. So it's incredibly prevalent. And so now more than ever, it's really important to understand how AOV is impacting your business, your industry, and the particular areas and topics that you are targeting. And with that, just a quick show note, if you have some time, I would love it if you could check out keyword research in Moz Pro. It shows you where and when AOVs are showing up for the topics and terms that you are targeting. So please check it out. I would love it if you could, and let me know how this helps you better inform your strategy, because not only does it give you a better sense of what the opportunity is there, but you can then adapt your strategy based off of that information. The other area that we discuss in this video is about local search, and Garrett's incredibly knowledgeable about this space as well. It's one of those areas that in 2004, he mentioned that it wasn't very impressive in terms of the experience, AOV experience for users. And not a lot has changed there. So a lot of the traditional tactics are still relevant, making sure that your listing is accurate and complete, and ensuring that you have a really keen eye on your reputation through your business reviews. All of those things still remain super important, whether you're targeting a search engine, LLMs, or your real life, real human customers. And with that, I have one other note, which is to have a little look at Moz Local. This is the tool that helps you maintain your listings, information. It's the source of truth for all your business information, and it helps you speed up that process of responding to reviews with a brand new AI feature. So you can get back to the business of running things that matter most and have the tools help you maintain the rest of it. So if you're looking to focus on these things, as many local businesses should do, but you're finding time to get it all done, have a little look at Moz Local, and you might find that it helps you. We do have a free tool that comes with that, the checklisting tool. So if you're wanting to have a little look at how your business is currently performing across these online directories, have a little look at that as well. And I hope it helps. That's it from me. No more notes. Thank you so much. I hope you find this episode interesting, and as interesting as I did filming it. Thank you so much. Hi, and welcome to another Whiteboard Friday Revisited, where we look at the past to better understand the future. Today, I'm joined by the delightful Garrett Sussman, Director of Marketing at Ipullrank, and all-round great guy. How are you getting on, Garrett?
Yo, Joe, dude, thanks for having me back. I am fantastic. Just before that, I'm so excited to talk about this topic because I feel like we're in this like messy, like ball of yarn of it all right now. And hopefully whatever we talk about today isn't different tomorrow, let alone a year ago. But it's a fun conversation. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. That messy ball of yarn, hard relate. Garrett and I first met at MozCon 2024, where we filmed this Whiteboard Friday called Optimizing for AI Overviews. at your own brackets, at your own risk. And just to give context to what was going on at that time, about, I think, a week before the conference, SGE officially changed to AI overviews. And then I think it was maybe a few days before that the infamous Google leaks happened, which Ipullrank and Mike King and presumably yourself were involved in. So speaking of that messiness, that sort of time, when you reflect on it, I feel like the messiness is always ongoing. What was your memories of filming this at that time, being so close to those things that were happening in our industry?
I feel like it's always tricky to talk about new and different in our industries because there's old school mentalities, there's new school mentalities, there's things are changing. And I feel like that was very much the beginning of this like kind of new phase of SEO. Like we've had feature snippets for a while, which broke the industry for a minute. And now you're introducing AI, like, you know, I guess late 2022 is when ChatGPT came out. And so, you know, SGE at the time felt like a reaction to ChatGPT. And we thought, and we'll get to AI mode at some point. I kind of thought AI mode was going to be what was going to be rolled out, but they put together SGE, and then finally we're like, when is it going to be a public? How's that going to impact things? And so everyone has this instinct when something like AI overviews comes out to be prescriptive. And yet there's so many unknowns and so many uncertainties. And yet here I am being like, based on what we know, caveat, 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 do this or do that, caveat, caveat. Like you have to bracket the caveat of everything. But it's still fun to speculate.
I mean, speculation is the most the most exciting and can be the most engaging kinds of content that we do, which is why I think they're so alluring to speculate. But I think if it's positioned, like you said, as genuine curiosity, which I think that you do in this, and this is what we know, this is what we think we know. Yeah, I think caveating anything, I think is worth it. And at the time, in particular, this caveat I think was mostly associated with the fact that we weren't really sure if you really targeted AI overviews, what would happen to your organic rankings. So it was necessary to warn people because we just didn't know. Do we have more insight into that? Do we know any more?
Well, I feel like we're still a moving target. There's still like this is the new status quo, which is we're seeing a fundamental change in the way that we think about the goals of SEO, what it means to get organic search. You know, even recently there's talking about, you know, the recent Google I/O talked about AI mode being rolled out into search and replacing search. Like that's an inevitability. You have this great decoupling talking about the growth of impressions and the decline of traffic, but maybe traffic is becoming more valuable because those who do click to your site are actually more likely to convert, they're more qualified. And so I think we are now, like SEO has always been a certain amount of uncertainty, but we're even more in that state right now. And it's really tricky. The other thing we didn't talk about is leading up to the AI overviews, we had the succession of like major algorithm updates, like month after month. We had the helpful content update. We had product reviews update, and all that feels almost like anachronistic now. It almost feels like algorithm updates are a thing of the past because it's constant. The issue with AI overviews is there's nothing static about it. The whole concept of rankings changes because just because you show up for one query doesn't mean that you're going to show up for the next query day two. And we've had, you know, personalized search results for a long, long time, but this takes it to a whole nother level. So it's a long way of saying that this is just the new normal now. Like it is volatile, dynamic, and really tricky for businesses to future proof their organic search strategy.
Very much so. And you mentioned featured snippets, and you mentioned this dynamic, shifting, changing results. You know, this what gives it the essence of being generative. When we as users, when we play around with AI overviews and it shows up by default in Google, it's something that is there when you search. There's a way to switch it off, but it's not something that many people would dive into and figure out how to do. But how is it distinct? So sometimes when I'm using AI overviews, I'm Googling, I feel like it's just a souped up featured snippet. It doesn't feel dynamic. It feels like it's probably cached. And I would assume that's the case because it has to be reasonably affordable to run. This is not going to be something that's going to be economically viable to continually generate new content. But sometimes it does feel like you're using something that is working with you, is developing with you, and has got that element of what you would experience in ChatGPT. If you're asking it, how do I decide how many liters of paint to paint a room that's this size and then this size? But one thing that I don't think I've heard people mention as much recently is this hallucinatory experience, how they can hallucinate. And I feel like when it's more of that experience, it's less of a featured snippet and more of a generative answer, I feel like the hallucinations come back. Are you feeling the same way? Like there is a distinct type of AI overview depending on what you're searching for?
Well, I do think, the way that AI overviews function, it has gotten better in terms of hallucinations. However, Google, it's funny, there's been so much talk about brand and authority and the value of brand these days. Google as a brand has earned consumers' trust for a long, long time. So unless it's obviously a lie or obviously something ridiculous in the output, I think most people trust whatever comes up from the generative AI overview output. I do think that these are training wheels to the transition to AI mode in the sense of like, this is I don't know if you want to call it clever, but it's an intermediary step between once we are thrusted. I like how you called out that you really can't turn AI overviews off. The only way you really can do it is by moderating your query and adding like, I've seen people saying like negative AI at the end of the query in the same way that people have appended like Reddit to make sure that they got Reddit results because they prefer Reddit results to, any basic biased business content. I think that shows the strength of Google's ecosystem in the sense of like when the whole DOJ antitrust trial in the US was happening, their whole case was around Google being a default search engine on Apple devices, Samsung, Firefox. Like you used Google because it was put in front of you, and people are lazy. Like they're not going to go and switch and make Bing their default. I think the fact that AI overviews has become like a default output that you can't really toggle off without some serious friction is going to get us more and more accustomed to this output, which inevitably will be the case with AI mode. And so for any SEOs that are bemoaning the loss of traditional SERPs and the loss of traditional traffic, like I empathize, but I'm also like, this is our reality. And I don't anticipate Google's market share seeing a real dip anytime soon. So you just have to adapt to what is in front of the consumer.
And that takes me to something that that you also mentioned in your Whiteboard Friday. You talked about there was three main types you identified at the time: informational, shopping, and local. And we can come back to those and look at whether that's still the three main types. But I think what you mentioned there about adapting is so important. Is for me, if I was bemoaning the loss of traffic for someone searching how much paint do I need to paint a room, the opportunity there is that the experience is so bad that my next search might well be, what's the best tool for calculating how much paint I need to paint a room? And you're just coming further and further down the funnel. And so figuring out if your site is now set up to cater for people and having a clear customer journey through, you're ranking for those terms, which are much more specific. It's less how much do I need and more like how specifically do I achieve this without wanting to, lob my phone across the room because it keeps giving me different answers that don't make any sense, and calculating in different ways using different formulas and assuming things that I haven't told it. So I think, again, like looking at that part of the funnel, coming back from informational, I think informational is in massive flux at the moment. There's everyone should have an AI overview strategy that clearly addresses what's happening with that part of their content strategy, and long form content. We discussed this with Cyrus in the previous episode. There's still a function for it within your SEO strategy. It's just figuring out what that looks like in terms of direct rankings and traffic that converts.
That is so the journey is such an important call out. So one thing that is significantly different in terms of our knowledge of AI overview since I originally did the Whiteboard Friday is this kind of understanding. And Mike King dove into the patents, and shout out to Rich Sanger, who kind of identified this before we knew there was a patent, is this idea of the query fan out, which Google called out, which is the fact that usually historically we've been so focused on creating content that addresses the search intent for the specific query that someone's using. The reality of AI overviews, and even more complex with AI mode, is that Google, using Gemini 2.5, is now taking your query and creating a slew of synthetic queries that fan out across related queries. To your point, predictive queries, like what do we think is going to be like the next query in the journey, complementary queries, taking all of those, searching for across the web, finding passages, generating an entire piece of content. And so as a content creator for a business, you almost need to address every different step of that journey, whether you do it in one long form piece of content or across, a whole range of different pieces of content, is something worth investigating and experimenting with. Cause I don't think anyone can say definitively, oh, this is the way that you do it. But that is now the consideration where we are building the entire content journey for our searchers, not just based on targeting keywords. Like that hasn't been the case for, over a decade of moving to this idea of like lexical search, just keywords, to semantic search, how it's all related. And we didn't really know that at the time when we were starting to think about AI overviews. Now, one call out here is AI overviews uses a simplified query fan out, whereas AI mode is much more complex. And that's something we need to be thinking in terms of future proofing, where that eventually will be the default. And you want to make sure that you fill those gaps as much as possible. One thing that is similar to what I said originally, AI overviews, that Mike King has spoken to again, we have this kind of like joke in the industry right now of people who are pro vector embeddings and cosine similarity, all this mathematical jargon around optimizing like the specific value of a passage for content. But it's something that the machine learning algorithms use to decide what content should be incorporated and cited in the AI overviews. It's a whole bunch, but it really speaks to this idea of the way that we think about content strategy and SEO is completely different now going forward.
It's like the art and the science. A content creator or someone who comes from that might say, I know that this passage is going to be suitable because I can see it. I can understand it. Somebody else with a more mathematical brain might say, I need to understand exactly the mathematical weightings of the composition of this phrase. And it's that beautiful combination, of art and sciences and how different people arrive at solutions. And sometimes you arrive at the same solutions using completely different paths and journeys, not to say either one is invalid.
Right. And it brings it back to brand and tone and voice. To your point, it's like you can't just write for a machine and get the factual output and hope that someone sees that and like, oh, this brand that writes like a robot is a brand that I want to engage with. No, you still need to have that personality. And as a brand, you still want to build content that aligns you with the values and attributes that you want your customer base to identify you as, so that when the ultimate goal being revenue, hopefully, or education, or improving the life of the world, making the world a better place. But ultimately the goal is like associating your brand with those ultimate goals of the relationship with the consumer. You can't negate that. So you're right. It's really difficult to navigate that line between being comprehensive, covering everything, speaking to the machines, but also really being a brand that your consumers are like, yes, they're authorities. They know what they're talking about. They have the best product. They have the best service. I want to be loyal to them forever and give them all my money or attention or whatever we're fighting for. That's the game now, right? And it is a game.
And in a way, when you look back, and that's the exercise we're doing here, if we look way back, it's always been the case. We've always advised, be mindful of not being too obsessed with writing for the algorithms, or you do miss the human element, and then you do lose out on the conversion side. And as the conversion side becomes more and more critical, and post conversion, which is that retention side that you're mentioning, and the loyalty that takes time to build up. It's not just a one and done. It's not just a one off. You're not just satisfying the user's intent or their need in that moment. You're then providing a good service, good follow up. The products are great. It's a very complex system that's put in place. But maybe that is something that as a society we move towards. It's actually more sustainable in a wider sense too, because we're saying, let's make sure that the experience ongoing is satisfying as well.
It's one of those things where, like, right now, as we move towards AI overviews taking over, AI mode taking over, we don't know what the second and third order consequences of that will be for content creation and businesses. Like, to your point, like, people optimized for rankings and they created copycat content where everyone said the same thing, and maybe they added a little thing because they wanted to be slightly better, and content became stale and it wasn't helpful and it wasn't a good user experience. And that's how it was for so long. Now I feel like people are going to either try to game the system, because there is a wild, wild west element of this where techniques, because there's so much less control when you're talking about an LLM, that techniques that worked 10, 15 years ago might work today. It might be a short-term gain and that might not be great for your brand, but there are going to be businesses that take advantage of it and say, okay, I'm good with just getting a few wins for right now. And then Google's still going to be the behemoth in the room for a long, long time, but we are having conversations around ChatGPT, around OpenAI, around Perplexity. There's always the potential for them to become legitimate channels for marketers to consider if enough of your audience is spending their time there and going there for search. But it becomes even more trickier because they're not, like, ChatGPT is not a search engine, even though it has search engine functionality, and it's getting there, but it hasn't been building the same way for a long, long time. So at what point do we have to actually consider, to your point, this kind of amorphous, holistic content strategy to not just address Google, but all of these other platforms that our audience might be spending time in? I mean, we already are doing it now when you consider it's not just about your own website, but being visible on Reddit, being visible on social. Like, we just heard that Instagram is going to be indexed soon, and that's going to impact search results. It's so much more complex, it feels like, and so hard to get it right for brands.
I've had people ask me who run really successful businesses. They've asked me, what is a viable strategy for encouraging my customers to mention my business on Reddit? And it was challenging at the time. This was a little while back, so maybe the advice has changed, but my advice at the time was to be a little cautious about sending your customers onto that platform. There's a ton of platforms where you can encourage people to leave reviews, depending on what their guidelines are for each platform, and a ton of places where reviews can be collated and you can pull that. And then my advice to them was to be present themselves as a business owner, to do more, to be out there and legitimately mentioning it where possible. I know there's strategies around that. Some work, some don't. Some you have to tread a very delicate line. But if you're present, then there's that halo effect of that working, and then it's a natural landscape. I think, again, I'm happy to be wrong or corrected, but I think if anyone is receiving services from people, and you mentioned about just being cautious there, and I think I would encourage people to just look back on the whole Ling Farm, Panda, everything to do with that, where it was very short term. And I would never bemoan anyone's right to try and game a system to achieve more for their business. I know that there's a lot wrapped up in that that's more than that. It's a very simple way to put it. But I know that people are out there trying to achieve things and test things, and that I would always encourage. But just, again, look back at what happened there and what correcting people had to do to sort that out once things no longer functioned that way and people were receiving penalties and so on.
Oh my goodness. I mean, okay, here's my little like hot take, reverse hot take right now is there was briefly a conversation around whether or not you should write a listicle about your industry or services and whether to include your business as number one on that list. And people kind of saying that is gross, that is bad marketing, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think that. I mean, I'm flirting with the idea of writing like best, agency, listicle and putting Ipullrank at number one because we're seeing legitimate leads come from ChatGPT from other folks who have written those articles. They fortunately included us and put themselves on the top, and I don't bemoan them. I'm like, that because someone coming to ChatGPT without any context, I don't think a lot of them are going to say, "Oh, there's that article from that site that they wrote about themselves. What a crappy company." Like, I just don't. I think that's a blip on the radar of an entire content journey. If they see that, they come to our site, but then they see like 15 other pieces of content that are just like badass, awesome content about talking about what you do, then I don't think that's a problem. However, I do see, I do understand there's a lot of moralistic high ground all over the place about how you approach this stuff. And like I get that. Like I get you have certain values and you stick to it and that's your brand and that's what people like about you. And that's a statement and that's cool. But I do think going back to the Whiteboard Friday, it's all so volatile. We're all just building content on quicksand and we're doing the best we can to your point, I think about Reddit. Ultimately, it's about creating a great product, a great service, to create memorable moments. Like memory is a really big thing that comes out over and over again when it comes to associating your brand with positive experiences like Coca-Cola for the longest time with their marketing. Yes, a lot of it was advertising, but they did such a great job of associating the brand with positive memories across a person's experience that then when they have the choice between different brands, they ultimately, people choose like their brains literally light up on the brain scans when they see Coca-Cola branding. So marketing's not dead. SEO's not dead. SEO is very much more of a branding channel than a pure performance channel, but people are still choosing products. People are still doing their research. And your responsibility is to find ways to be visible that has a positive association with your brand. So you're ultimately selected.
Honestly, I think there's ways to create lists and put your brand first.
Yeah. You got to promote yourself. I mean, I 2 times I've thought about like Ross Simmons in my head, and that's how good he is. But like, he talks about Reddit and being visible on Reddit and just being present there, like not necessarily doing anything inauthentic and forcing people or seeding that, but to be present. And then the other thing is distributing and being everywhere. Like promote yourself. Don't do it in a salesy way, but talk about what you're good at. It's funny. We mentioned that the way I have my listicle set up is framing it as an experiment. Like I'm getting the information. I haven't published it yet, but I'm getting the information about who the top, agencies are for B2B enterprise. And at the bottom saying like, this is all an experiment to see if we show up in AI. And, on the one hand, it'll be interesting to see if it picks that up. On the other hand, it'll be interesting to see if we're like penalized because it's framed that way. But right now, the most exciting thing about our industry is the ability to experiment. And there's so much to experiment right now.
And Garrett, in your Whiteboard Friday that we filmed, I mean, it was a year ago, 11 months ago, you were looking at the different verticals where AI overviews were showing up. And we were looking at the 3 main areas, which is informational, as we know, incredibly timely, still consuming a lot of those searches, local, and shopping. So how are these 3 verticals still being affected? Where are we seeing the biggest uptick in AI overviews? Considering a year ago, 1% of searches had AI overviews showing up. I think now it's around 50%, depending on what you're searching for.
Yeah, I think it's surprising in general how much AI overviews have been rolled out. I think Google has made a lot of progress with e-commerce. They have the whole shopping tab, which is independent of AI overviews, AI organized. So whatever you search for, it does a really good job of giving carousels of like topics and subtopics and more information, brand driven to dive into. They do sometimes add an AI overview above these carousels on the shopping tab to try to give you some more guidance. We see it in the AI overviews, but it's really not fleshed out yet. I feel like it's in a weird hybrid state where sometimes it makes recommendations in carousel rich media form where you can click on and see, a whole panel of more information. Sometimes it's still trying to give you just more context and it's not the best shopping experience. I think this is going to change dramatically when we get to AI mode. We saw some demos during Google I/O showing a completely more comprehensive shopping experience with a whole range of carousels and grids and the ability to try clothes on, to ultimately purchase products within AI mode. Even the one that they have rolled out now doesn't have all of those features. So it goes back to the volatility. And you know, Google is still in a lot of ways competing with Amazon, where people are going directly to Amazon for their searches. You got OpenAI, which has added Shopify partnership. We don't know how much of an advantage e-commerce products have by being on a Shopify CMS, but there's a lot of changes. I think the e-commerce experience is better than it's been on Google. They've always kind of dropped the ball when it came to e-commerce, but it's making improvements. I think local is still garbage, if I have to be honest. Like during AI overviews last year, when I was talking about it, the results were really wrong. It was pulling from like multiple websites. Like I would look for a law firm and you'd see like the same law firm pop up 3 times. It would pull from the map pack. It would pull from Reddit socially, which I actually thought was really interesting. Like I live in Northern Virginia. There's a Northern Virginia Reddit. I like the idea of it pulling local results from a Reddit. It's highly dependent on Google reviews as opposed to Yelp and Facebook and TripAdvisor, but it's integrating those slightly more. You still see TripAdvisor and Yelp pages pulled into some of the local results. So I feel like local is very much a work in progress, despite the importance that it has for any local business. I mean, personally, on an anecdotal level, I go to Google Maps as opposed to actual Google search to find a local business. I know a lot of people use TikTok. They'll go to Reddit. They'll go to Instagram for local searches. So it's a very interesting problem. But what I will say to all this is it's still critically important to make sure that you are optimize the knowledge graph for a local business, specifically through your Google business profile, making sure there are no gaps in information. There's a ton of different content that supports the local experience, from Reddit, from reviews, from the Google business profile. And then the same with e-commerce and just commercial searches in general, making sure that you are covered across the social graph. So making sure that everything in your merchant center feed is covered with attributes, with, your shipping options, with your sale options, coordinating with merchandisers and retailers. Like it's really complex. Like your reviews, your website, there's so much that you can be doing. But I do think ultimately, and I'll sum this up, long-winded response, is that with e-commerce, there's an opportunity there, regardless of AI overviews and AI mode, because people are still ultimately trying to buy products. So even if informational searches or media publishers might see a reduction in traffic, it's never been more funneled towards your business as an e-commerce or just a commercial business.
And again, with local and local SEO for your business, completeness, consistency, accuracy, that's always been really key. So again, that's not just delivering that information so that LLMs or Google can understand it. It's so your customers can turn up at your store at the right time so that they understand all of the products and experiences they're going to have there. And and reviews as well. I think you mentioned, I can't remember exactly what you mentioned in the Whiteboard Friday, but you were sort of commenting on the reviews and how they were being displayed. And I think again, focusing on that as part of your extension of your brand, the customer sentiment, it's always been important, but now there's another reason to focus on it and make sure that you have current, authentic reviews from satisfied customers.
Okay. Before I actually started at Ipullrank with Mike, I was working for an online. It's actually how I got into SEO. Working for an online reviews SaaS producer, SaaS product that helped businesses kind of solicit reviews in an appropriate way to show up on Google. And it's always been kind of a complex relationship for small businesses or just local businesses in general, because asking for reviews works even if it feels uncomfortable, like setting up email drip campaigns to remind your customers to leave a review, not telling them what to say, but at the very least to leave a review, because usually people who have negative experiences are very quick to leave a review, although people with positive experiences are less likely, and that doesn't feel very fair. So you need to actually make the request. And to your point, there's so much rich information that customers provide about your business that's hard to surface on your website, both personal experience as a form of social proof, but actual topical, relevant keywords, pain points, all that comes up in the reviews. And Google is most definitely surfacing that. And Amazon does it too. You know, they're using AI to service content in your reviews. So I think that it is, aside from the actual location, the proximity of where your location is based on compared to where a person's searching, reviews is one of the next most important pieces of content and marketing initiatives that you should have in place for a local business.
Yeah, we did do a survey of consumers, which I'll link to below, which talks about that exact thing. You know, what moment does someone make a decision to leave a review? And it's much more biased towards a negative experience. So you do need to encourage people. The other thing I would say to businesses is don't worry if you get a bad review. I know it can be really upsetting and it can be something that you think, I'll never recover from this, but that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to either go out and find the customers that are satisfied with your service and encourage them to respond. Also, if I see a negative review, I sometimes think, am I like that person? Do I care about the same things? So I think people also understand people don't always have the same requirements. So you can easily have consumers still come into your business because maybe they don't care as much about that specific thing detailed in that review. Or you can sometimes pick out someone who has maybe like a more angsty tone that you think, well, maybe I'll just discount that and focus on the other reviews. Having said that, you definitely want him to get more of the 4-5 stars to like tip the balance, because that overall percentage rating is really important as well.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, don't expect a 5-star like rating. That seems fake and manufactured, but you do want it to be above 4 stars because, you know, like you've run a ton of great consumer surveys at Moz, and so many of them say that, yeah, like people do judge based on reviews. But to your point, a lot of times when I was working in the review business, the idea was when a business owner responds to the review, you're not always really just responding to the angry customer. You're showing every other future customer how you would react as a business if they ran into an issue. Because to your point, a lot of people, not everybody are rational, but a lot of people are rational and understand that the way a business owner responds says a lot about your brand beyond the specific problem they were.
Absolutely. Okay, Garrett. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you so much for your time. Before we wrap up, I'd love to know what you're working on at the moment, what you're excited about as it relates to search, AI, anything else within the search industry.
Oh my God. Joe, well, first, thanks for having me. This is so much fun. It's great to reconnect. I love what you're doing with this initiative, with this program. So right now for me, it's all about AI mode, the inevitability of it coming, looking at how do we solve this problem of monitoring across conversational search platforms. And then ultimately, I am obsessed with the psychology of search. So really starting to think about as we use these conversational search platforms more, how does that change our behavior? We're not using keywordies where we're searching for like one keyword. We're having a much more natural language type of query. And that gets us a very complex customer search journey, as you brought up, where it impacts the way we think about the depth and the breadth of our content strategy. And so Ipullrank, that's really the main focus. As my boss, Mike King, kind of posited, it's so much more than SEO now. It's this whole idea of relevance engineering, of giving yourself as many bites at the apple as you can through content strategy, AI, information retrieval, digital PR, and ultimately user experience. So people choose you over and over again. So things are changing, but it is fun. We're in the best industry, and this is a fun timeline.
I absolutely love your outlook. I'm gonna be walking on clouds for the rest of the day. It's such a treat to chat with you. Please go and find and follow Garrett on LinkedIn, YouTube. Ipullrank on YouTube. I'll link to that as well. And yeah, connect with him there. And after this video, please go and watch the original Whiteboard Friday that Garrett and I filmed last year at MozCon. Thanks so much, Garrett. See you later.
Thanks, Joe.